All right, welcome back, everyone. As we continue on, we're going to get right into our materials here and move from that disseminating trine into the disseminating biseptile. And here again, that harmonics of 7. Time-wise, I might try speeding us up a little bit, looking at the material that we have yet to get through in 2 more sections. So, but again, anytime you have questions, you're always welcome to interrupt me and ask. I don't mind at all, and I have a tail. You got to put your tail up, babe. And so when we get to that biseptile, which remember that sense of special destiny or fatedness, that realignment of the evolutionary purpose between any two planets. The biseptal and the disseminating phase, key people, circumstances will show up in helping the individual share that original evolutionary purpose between the two planets in the most productive and expanded ability that society can recognize. The sense of special destiny between those two planets is releasing the most socialized value between them that is possible into society. And so here there is a cooperation with societal or collective need in a conscious state of awareness as we start to question, is this all there is? Is there more to it? So you see how, again, there's whole synchronicity that seems to come through for us with two planets being productive, being expressed out there in society. And yet, at the same time, as we're moving closer and closer to the 270 of the last quarter phase, there can be a beginning of sensing here that there must be something more to this. And so I have an example for this, and it's going to be Eileen's chart. And so let me get my laser pointer going here, and I'll show you the two planets that we're looking at. And so in our example here with Eileen, we are going to use Saturn, Jupiter. And here is Saturn over here at 5.5 degrees Scorpio in the 6th house. We move through the zodiac until we get to Jupiter at 22 Cancer, 22.5 Cancer in the 3rd house. And the degree between them is 257 minutes, 257 degrees, 5 minutes. The disseminating biseptile is 257.10. So just 5 minutes shy of being an exact biseptile. And so remember the planetary pair of Jupiter and Saturn, that 20-year cycle of social growth and evolution, and how we establish ourselves in society and mature to be functioning in society in some role. I will many times look at the Jupiter Saturn planetary pair as both of them contributing to our work in our work out in society. And so Eileen, if you remember, was joined the Air Force because she wanted to travel, married someone in the Air Force, has done a lot of traveling. When I had asked people if they had any questions, one of the things that Eileen had questioned is how she always ends up back in Winnipeg when all she wanted to do was to leave and stay away. And so that, if you look at that, and I wasn't seeing it specific to Jupiter, Saturn, but it sure seems like it could fit into the picture. In general, Eileen, the South Node Cancer second starts to come in. The Cancer Capricorn axis is always going to be about dealing with family of origin issues, and that could be one of the pulls that brings you back here to this area. It could also be the Jupiter Uranus in Cancer in general as well. And it can be the fourth house Pluto. So you have several signatures in your chart with the moon, Cancer, fourth house signature that again will deal with all of the family of origin issues. And I think all three of them can pull you in that direction in some way. Now, with this Jupiter, Saturn specific to this disseminating biseptile, it can just feel like throughout your career, there were always certain circumstances and situations where it would almost have seemed out of your control. That septile, that appearance of the fatedness to just align you to do your work in whatever ways were necessary for you to be out there functioning in society. I think because Saturn rules Capricorn, part of that familial polarity, Cancer Capricorn, and because Jupiter is there in Cancer as well, if we take your question specific to this family of origin and why do I always end up back in Winnipeg, I think that there's just a larger purpose for you in healing with family, in dealing with the familial karma, so to speak. And it is, for whatever reasons, the universe just brings you back. Biseptile forces outside your control. It just brings you back here to work through it, to, I would say, find emotional inner peace, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of your work, regardless of family, regardless of the society that you live in, Jupiter, Saturn. There, with this Jupiter and Cancer in this biseptile, and going back to this original point with the Saturn in Scorpio here, this can be a signature for, Saturn Scorpio wounding in that family of origin, even the betrayals of trust in some way with siblings, or issues around the resources in some way. And it is for this Jupiter signature in this biseptile to Saturn to find an inner peace and an inner healing for you. Two water signatures in this aspect. You've got to find that emotional wellness within you, regardless of the circumstances that go on around you. And so this biseptile is going to bring you in those life situations, Jupiter, Saturn, that say, this is mine to address. This is mine to heal. Regardless of those outer worlds, disseminating phase, society, outer groups, regardless of them, regardless of family, I have to be well within myself emotionally, and I have to be well with my circumstances. Saturn is one of those archetypes where it is form. And we, if it's entirely random, then I want to be born with the silver spoon, right? It's not. The structure of consciousness with Saturn is always going to line up with where our soul is at in its evolutionary journey. And the Jupiter in Cancer is saying, heal and heal through your societal circumstances, which will include the family. Does that make sense, Eileen?
There you go. Makes a lot of sense. You had the work thing down. Um, Done a lot of temporary work, usually because things happen that I just never expected.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had talked one of the other ladies before about the typical 1950s, 60s dysfunctional family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was it, and that there was a lot going on there that I thought I got past, and then it showed up physically later in later years as the fibromyalgia
Mm-hmm.
for starters.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned over the years, like how that got taken in and
Mm-hmm.
gets to almost be part of your DNA, and
Yes.
what you would have to do to move on.
Yes. Yes. I will say to you, my husband has Saturn in Scorpio in the sixth house. And when we first got together, Jeffrey Green was still doing readings. And so my husband had a session with him. And he told Leroy, he says, by the way, I just want to tell you that whenever I see Saturn in Scorpio's sixth house, I it seems to be souls that have an ability to really regenerate themselves and heal things that nobody thinks they can heal. There's a regenerative ability to the healing, and that has been
I,
true. That has been
I
true.
was
Go
I
ahead.
thought a lot of that might have to do with my Sagittarius moon and optimism, that no matter what happens, somehow, and sometimes I don't know how, I do manage to bounce back.
Yes. Well, there you go. There's a tidbit on that Saturn. And
Okay.
then, that Saturn Jupiter, in regards to your family, it also will just bring through insights from that outer world to help you understand things about your family. Why did I
Well,
draw? Go ahead.
there's one thing. After knowing astrology more, I
Hmm.
found that I attract Scorpio.
Hmm.
And sometimes to the point, if I before I could handle it better, I would, oh, you're Scorpio, I'm getting out of here. I I have three brothers born in the first week of November,
Yeah.
and my parents' wedding was, that same week for the anniversary. So it was just like whenever I met up with the Scorpio energy, it was like, I got to get out of here.
Yeah. Well, you can see with the Placidus houses, the Scorpio interception in the sixth house. And let me say this in regards to interceptions in general. Traditional astrology says when you see intercepted signs, it means that there is an inability for that energy to express itself. Um, Jeffrey Green, EA Teachings, said, don't assume, may or may not be true. You may find that those archetypes were so overly emphasized in a past life that they don't need to be emphasized in this lifetime. And
Oh, that feels better.
it comes down to observe, correlate again. And one of the observations would be how many planets are in Taurus, how many planets are in Scorpio, only one,
Yeah.
but it's the structure of consciousness. And then the rulers. The ruler of Scorpio is Pluto. How many aspects does Pluto have? You see the waxing trine with the moon here that brings an ability to emotionally understand and grasp things that will be helpful with the family. The ruler of Taurus here is Venus in this new phase conjunction to Neptune, balsamic conjunction to Saturn. So you see how Venus is highly active. So it is possible here that these archetypes are understood more than you think you understand them.
Well, I've gotten better at it.
Mm-hmm.
But here's something when you're pointing like to the empty house,
Mm-hmm.
12th house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I noticed, because I've got that almost stellium in the sixth house and nothing in the 12th. When the sun passes through each of those, like that's when my physical symptoms get worse. So I now know that if I can just make it through to the end of March, that and into April, I'll feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have a question about the software. Like, I found Astrodean so many years ago, and I thought this was great. And went with like I did charts by hand before that, and then I found Astrodeans. Now I notice in your software, and I went with that honeycomb uh, date book thing just to see. And you guys have both picked up that there's an opposition between my Jupiter and my Chiron, which Astrodeans never, ever, no matter how hard I try, never picks up in their software. And I'm just curious about that.
I'm not going to be able to answer that question because I don't know their software.
If
Okay.
I may, Kim, this is Julie. If I
Mm-hmm.
may comment,
Mm-hmm.
on Astrodeans, you actually have to select to chart the aspects to Chiron. There is a check mark.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay. Thank you.
You can check off. Just let me know offline if you can't find it. Yeah.
No, I know what you mean now. I just so much of it showed up anyway when you did the PDF tables that I wasn't paying attention. That was my thing.
I
But with the sixth and 12th house, the energy's there. Like they're true. They really get triggered in those times of the year. Anyway, that's all I. But you were very right on with the work situation, and thank you.
Mm-hmm. You are most welcome.
The other question was, it looks like Pluto has gone over almost all my planets.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the upheaval
Yes.
in my life?
Yes.
I noticed that one day.
Yeah, I have the same situation. I don't know if you remember my chart, but without Chiron, my planets all fit within 127 degrees, that locomotive, as they call it. And I've had Pluto go over every single one of my planets except Uranus. So yes, the death and rebirth, the intensity of evolution within the soul. I mean,
Okay.
none of us get through a lifetime without Pluto aspects, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And
No,
and so
but I noticed Chris was doing a presentation one day, and I just looked at it and thought, "Oh my lord, it's been working on everything."
yes, yeah, yeah.
And then we just had the full moon in Sagittarius,
Mm-hmm.
and my moon is in Sagittarius in the seventh. Now, if a full moon is extra light shining on you, you're on you. Is that how that works?
Well, you had a lunar return. You had the moon return back to its spot
Okay.
where it was natally. And so this is giving you an opportunity for emotional insight and emotional rebirthing. And it was emphasized because it was a lunar eclipse.
Now, when things contact my, this is my last question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When things contact my moon, and usually Mercury or the moon again, it just makes me feel agitated and anxious rather than I thought I would feel good because it was all coming together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, a moon in Sag is excitable.
Okay.
Okay, you have the moon in a fire sign in an air house. So
Mm-hmm.
that stirs things up on
Okay.
emotional mental levels.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you. I just
Yeah.
curious.
Yep.
But thank you for everything.
Sure. You're most welcome. Okay, I'm going to move us along here. We're going to get to the last aspect in disseminating phase, which is the last quarter square. And it is on the less than side, less than 270 degrees, so 265, 267. And what we are starting to do here, because moving into the ending of that disseminating phase, we start to rebel against the consensus. You know, this phase, it's learning everything we can about society, and then all of a sudden, we're full. We've had enough of society. And so it starts the crises in consciousness, as Dane Rudier will call the last quarter square. It starts that as the soul has become socialized. And excuse me, thought I was going to sneeze and I didn't know if I could get to the mute button fast enough, but it passed. Eileen, you may want to mute yourself, honey.
Oh, sorry.
No
Thank you.
worries, no worries. And so the soul has become, very socialized with the expression of these two planets. They've learned how these planets work in society, but then they're also becoming aware that the consensus society has limitations. It limits how Mars Venus can be in a relationship. For instance, that it has to be between one female and one male. It limits how we can express ourselves emotionally. Moon, Jupiter. You're not allowed to go overboard in rage or cry a river of tears out there in public as Jupiter expands the emotions. We're aware that there's got to be more to it, but we don't quite know what it is yet. We are just bringing up that whole inkling, sensing that there's more to life. And so as these two planets then move through, they move into that last quarter phase. And as you see here, these key words, the crises in consciousness or beliefs. And we also then move from yin, energy moving in, back out to yang, energy moving outward again. And so with last quarter phase, there's a crisis with our individual belief systems. What do I believe? Now, people, remember, they create all of their rules, customs, norms in order to live together. They also will create their consensus beliefs and philosophical systems that explains the nature of our existence. And when you have any two planets moving through this phase, we are trying to decondition those two planets from the consensus. Almost all of you on, or I would say all of you on, this workshop are probably way beyond consensus religions such as Christianity. That old man in a white beard sitting on a cloud judging us. Why would something perfect create this mess? That's the last quarter question. That's that crises over. Wait a minute. There's more to this. I just can't buy into the societal beliefs anymore. And so this gets accentuated through this phase, and especially with the last quarter aspect, which we'll look at. And so the rebellion starts against these consensus beliefs because as we go through the last 90 degrees, it's all about expanding consciousness, broader, 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 understanding source eventually. And so this phase, we're to expand our consciousness and embrace universal truths. And universal truths are timeless. They've always existed. They go beyond what our human-made belief systems tell us is right and wrong, or good and bad. And in EA, we say, natural law, which is our, natural spiritual laws and principles, get shortened into natural law. You can distort natural law, you can suppress natural law, but you cannot destroy it. And that's what we are looking for when we start to go through this phase. So here we are beginning that process of culminating and completing anything, any desires between those two planets that have not yet been finished or resolved in however we have expressed them up to this point, 3/4 of the way around the circle. Now, last quarter phase will relate back to its opposite, which is the first quarter phase. Remember that crises in action, and I've just got to get out there and manifest these two planets in a new way. Well, with the last quarter phase and this expanding of consciousness, crises in our consciousness and beliefs, there can be a loss of our sense of self. There can be a loss of how we individuated those two planets because they are becoming so ingrained in society and the collective. And so, because of the polarity of these two phases, even though we're expanding through that last quarter phase, trying to understand larger and larger picture between any two planets, we still have to have an individual expression of them in any ways we have not yet done so. Now, it's going to be most intense when we have the actual aspect of the last quarter square. And the crises in consciousness is going to be a tension between what we've accomplished so far, 3/4 of the way around the circle, and what is yet unfinished. What is driving us, pushing us forward. And so, again, we've learned all we can learn in society, but we need to expand it. We need to expand it to a universal awareness of these two planetary archetypes, how they would exist in a more natural perspective beyond consensus limitations. And so, with this square, all the old patterns, beliefs, cultural norms, taboos, societal values, they're not working for us with these two planets. And so, relative to that first quarter, we have to give it a personal meaning, and we have to give a social meaning to these two planets that is expanding. And so the deconditioning from consensus becomes a big question. Doesn't make sense anymore. What will with these two planets? So, what to believe, think, act, and feel becomes the key concepts that we are literally looking at in these last quarter aspects. Now, just so happens I didn't bring in specific examples with the disseminating square or the last quarter square. So if you have these in your chart, and after the workshop, perhaps you can have some reflection with these two planets and what is the natural expression of these archetypes versus what you have been conditioned with through your family, through your society, through your relationships and belief systems. Where are you expanding with that? As we move through the crises of this, eventually we come to the quintile, the last quarter quintile at 288 degrees, which will bring, which is the harmonics of 5. And remember, quintiles are creativity. So as we're moving along, then the intent with the two planets is to transform the consciousness of these planets in relationship to who we are as an individual and how we identify with any society. And so we are really learning to relate to ourselves on an inward basis with any two planets in a new way. We are more than our egocentric in the first half of the circle. We are more than our socialization in the third quadrant of the circle. Now we're going into that last quadrant and we're really expanding as much as we can. And so a quintile aspects between any two planets really expands our awareness and understandings of the universe, including, how these two planets will relate to universal source, God, Goddess, Great Spirit, however you want to determine it. And so I did bring in a quintile aspect here. And so we will now look at Veronica's chart. And let me quickly give you the two planets that we are going to work with here. We are going to work with Uranus and Mars. And so if we start with the slower moving planet, which is Uranus, the 0 point, we are moving all the way around the circle to Mars, and their angle is 286 degrees and a few minutes. So we're 2 degrees shy of that biquintile, but we're moving into it so we can feel it. And, Mars Uranus is a planetary pair that, traditional society or mundane collective society will go, well, these two are just, war animals. They cause all kinds of upsets and strifes in our life. And when we look at it from our typical point of view from evolutionary astrology, Mars and Uranus as a planetary pair is that individualization of our soul's desires. And so we've come through the circle really trying to, break free Uranus and express ourselves how we want to with our desire nature. That biquintile is leading us to almost a weariness with society. And we're going, well, this ability and desire to become Mars, it's got to have, value, meaning to me. Last quarter phase. And the biquintile is the creativity to spark the meaning. And you see how that is such a deeper awareness of what, traditional society would say with Mars and Uranus. Now, if we start to make this specific for Veronica, she is part of the Uranus in Sag mini generation, whereby the individualization process is to really break free and be authentic self. That's Sag. Sag is right brain. It's philosophical systems, and when you see planets in Sag or the ninth house, it can connotate souls that have a natural understanding of natural law, natural spiritual principles. When you see a plethora of the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces, or the mutable houses, third, sixth, ninth, 12th, sometimes we will call all of that energy a daemon soul, Daemon, and that means soul fused with nature. Christianity bastardized the word into demon. And so when we look at the slower moving planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in Sag or ninth house, that is one of the things to uncover from the patriarchal distortions. And in this case, this volunteer also has the structure of consciousness, Saturn, there as well. And Saturn Mars is in that last quarter phase. So what I sense here is with this Mars Saturn is for this soul, her whole desire nature as she evolves through time is to be authentic to herself versus that Mars in Libra. I have Mars in Libra too, okay? I call it the karma chameleon. Which one of my many personalities should I put on so that you like me and have a relationship with me? And boy, I did that in my youth. And so you now are with that Mars in Libra 10th in this biquintile to Uranus. You have just got to break free and express yourself as you naturally are. And your evolution and your desire to become. You've got to have that deep inner relationship with yourself. The biquintile, you've got to be deepening your relationship with Source, and that's going to totally transform your relationships with others. Make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah. Helpful questions with what I just said?
What's really interesting what you talked about, and it reminded me, I mean, when I when I first came to Canada, and then when I started studying at the university in 2010. I first, picked psychology, and I think like there was a huge need in me to understand myself. But then it was interesting how like I took a huge interest in sociology as well. And so my undergrad degree was both in psychology and sociology, but then for my master's degree I went on just in sociology because it was that I feel like the shit disturber in me, for lack of a better word. What I really liked about sociology was that it actually challenged the status quo and the patriarchal or authoritarian view of society. But then, actually halfway through my master's degree, it stopped making sense to me too, because then I, started noticing how even in this, like in this oppositional view, how it was also conformist in a way,
Mm-hmm.
how that critique of the society as it is still wasn't, coming from a really authentic and place. So
Yeah.
I actually had to leave that master's degree, and I think I mentioned like it was around a period where I felt like everything totally lost, like it was a total loss of meaning
Mm-hmm.
in my life, in relationship and career, just society, my life stopped making sense to me. And so now now I see it, and I feel even with the job that I'm doing right now, it's more so uh that I'm like I have time for like the things that I really feel like I need to be doing for myself, like the to read the things that I need to be reading. And it's because like at this time I choose like not to let's say build my career in, I don't know, like as a policy analyst for the government or something like that, where I feel like I would have been just forced to do the things that society want me to do, like to perform, to live up to my potential, but from a place that wouldn't be authentic to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm.
Yes. So now you see that it's not just the confusion of Neptune square the nodes, which we'll look at later today,
Mm.
and these planets in the last two houses, which, have a deepening of philosophy for you.
Mm.
The Saturn balsamic Uranus, you're really having to surrender balsamic, okay,
Mm.
conjunction to what is truth for you, Sag, first
Mm.
house. And you see now with the Mars in this last quarter phase and in the biquintile with Uranus, this need to fulfill your desires to be you from whatever provides deeper value and meaning for yourself.
Mm. Mm.
Yes, you've got so much in your chart that is breaking free from consensus.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. I'm just aware of time. So, okay, here we go again. And next we move to the harmonics of 6 with the last quarter sextile, 300 degrees. And so here we come upon a new creative identity of ourself in relation to these two individual planets, understanding the cosmic whole. But now these two planets can have a little bit of harmony. We've come um, you know, 30 degrees through this phase. We're 2/3 of the way through the phase now. We've been making the effort to expand our awareness of the universe relative to the two planets involved, and they're learning how to function in an individual and a societal or universal perspective. And just like the trines here, and the waxing sextile, there's choice points. It's easy to resist growth here, but it's easy to make growth here. And what we're meant to do is to continue the evolutionary path of expanding consciousness between these two planets in whatever way. Then we move to the septile, the harmonics of 7, that special destiny or fatedness, and this is in last quarter phase. This is 308.5 degrees. And so this individual action with these two planets can be taken in relative to just understanding things from a broad perspective. And this is a realignment of these two planets and their expression on an individual level, but in context of universal society, universal timeless laws. So there can, really be manifestations in unique and special ways with these two planets at this point. As with anything, it can be distorted. And what we can have here is thinking that we are really special. We are, the chosen one. We can almost play God here. I got all this figured out in the universe, with Neptune, Venus, and I am the one who's bringing universal love onto the planet. Bow down and worship me, please. So, delusions of grandeur is what can happen here, thinking we're super special because we have this ability to be so aware of how these planets can express themselves in the world. And so, if that's the case, we're going to have key situations, circumstances, people that will realign us. We will fall off that pedestal if we put ourselves on it and think we're the chosen one. And so it continues to, in many ways, as the whole last 90 degrees does, we're not God. We're not Source. And so, as we're winding down between these two planets, if we need some realignment in regards to their purpose, this is where it can give us a chance to do exactly that. And then we move into the last quarter semi-square. Here we are back to the harmonics of 8. This is going to be less than 315 degrees, and it's that transition into the balsamic phase. Now remember, last quarter is yang, balsamic is yin. And so we start to get that pressure that the energy is not moving outward. It starts to turn us inward. And so it starts bringing in an internalized stress because there's a need to withdraw from some of this social interaction between these two planets in order to, it's a gestation for the rebirthing of whatever's going to be the new seeds, the new purpose between these two planets, but we're not there yet. It's the awareness of it. And so it can create some frustrations because we're becoming aware of the future and future needs and desires between these two planets, but we still got 45 degrees to go with them now. And so we have to finish up these two planets, and we have to finish up whatever the individual expressions are and how we express that into a society. And there can be societal obligations between these two planets that we still have to fulfill. So you start to see that yang yin energy being intensified here. And so this is an interesting aspect to look at when you see planets in the waning semi-square, as I call it, whether it's last quarter or full or balsamic phase, because a soul consensus between the two planets, but they may not know how to express it and know exactly what's going on. And so they've got to kind of walk both worlds. They've got to have that inner time period, but they also have to have that outer responsibility with everything as well. And so here I'm going to give you another chart example, and we are going to work with Shelley's chart again. And the planets that we are going to look at is Chiron and Venus. Whoops, gotta get this going. And so here is her Chiron, just a few degrees inside the ascendant, Aries first house. And we go all the way around the circle to Venus over here at 24 Aquarius 11th. And their angle is 314 degrees, 25 minutes. Half a degree from balsamic phase, that finishing up of last quarter. When you look at Venus Chiron as a planetary pair, one of the things that we're really trying to heal is our self-reliance, Venus. So we can have woundedness in regards to self-reliance. We could have woundedness around what we really value for ourselves and what we value in relationships. Venus is a dual archetype. Inner side, Taurus, self-reliance, relationship with self. Outer side, the Libra, relationships with others outside ourselves. So there can be relationship wounding here. And you can see that it adds to the picture in regards to the Mars degrees. I want to just quickly check and see what the Mars Venus angle is for this volunteer. So hold on just a second. The Mars Venus is 313 degrees 38 minutes. So 314 degrees. We have Venus Mars in that last quarter semi-square as well. So these you can really start to see here. We're just looking at these three planets, the woundedness with relationship with herself and woundedness in intimate relationships. And so, as we're looking at this, when we look at Venus Mars in this aspect, this is a soul who really can't relate to societal norms in intimate relationships. You know, in Jeffrey Green's day, he would say the Betty Crocker woman, the Marlboro man, you know, that traditional male female. Venus Mars in the last, 90 degrees of the circle, they can't relate to that stuff anymore. And so what Chiron is bringing in here for her is this need to really, heal her relationship with herself. And it's going to be bringing in awareness that she has to heal her relationship with source to heal relationship with self. Okay, this moving, inching towards balsamic phase, but even last quarter says this. And then as she does that, it will evolve how she is in relationship with another, with an intimate partner. Now, one of my mantras that I have a tendency to say in general is the relationship we have with ourself is identical to the relationship we have with God Goddess. And the relationship we have with God Goddess or Source is identical to the relationship we have with ourself. So, understanding that concept, you see that in this process of healing an inner relationship with yourself and deeply learning what you value, Venus, you're also healing your relationship with source energy, with what you perceive to be universal source. And that just, it in broad terms can shift the soul from conditional love to unconditional love. I love you no matter what, even if you perceive the best thing for you is a Y in the road. And you want the partner to say, I love you no matter what, and I love you even if you want to leave. And when you have that type, I want what's best for you, then there's the freedom to stay or go. And there is that freedom to really work then on deepening the relationship and turning it from karma mate to soul mate. And so I will say for you, volunteer, with some of these environmental conditionings that you shared with us, this can be what's going on for you in relationship on a deeper level with your partner. Does this make sense?
It does make sense. And it's so fascinating to, this wasn't on my radar before, looking at phasal relationships like this. And so it's kind of mind blowing, because when you naturally look at a chart with looking at aspects, this is not something that comes out, but so explains the struggle of that Mars Chiron relationship to Venus, that I can see already some of the conversations I've had clearly relate to that dynamic. Mm-hmm. Without realizing that it was that dynamic. But it gives me a better understanding of why I've had to go there. And that was my biggest struggle in shifting. Mm-hmm. And so thank you. It gives a lot of clarification, because I look at the Uranus in the 7th house kind of more in that oppositional aspect. And that doesn't always relate to what the situation is. This gives a better understanding of that underlying struggle to move forward, more relates to that Venus Mars Chiron relationship. So thank you so much.
Yes, 2 comments with, I think it was the last one that we looked at, the example before you. So you heard what I said about Mars, Uranus as a planetary pair from a deeper level, the ability to individualize and express and act upon what you desire. Okay. And then the second thing is, you said it, but it's the purpose of this whole workshop to recognize that the phasal relationship between any 2 planets is the foundation between them. And there's a depth of meaning in that, whether or not there's a specific aspect. And I think that may be what you're all understanding and grasping as we move through this over these 2 days. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move on now to the balsamic phase. Last but not least, and you see here the key word is spirit, ideals, and of course you see it's yin, so it's energy moving back to the center. And so in balsamic phase, for any 2 planets, there is an evolutionary need to bring their energy, their expression to completion, to bring everything that they were going to learn and experience together to a finish, so that they will then rebirth into a new cycle. I remember Jeffrey Green saying one time, there's a reason we have an unconsciousness. If we were aware of how many lifetimes we have lived, we'd all be depressed. So if you think those two planets go around that cycle of 0 to 360 one time and you're done, ha 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 ha. Nope. We can go through, I mean, just think about it. Can you see going through a 0 to 360 cycle with Venus, Mars, and intimate relationships from the consensus perspective? Maybe doing that more than once. Can you see the soul needing to do it from an individuated perspective? And then can you see the soul doing it from a spirituated perspective? Jeez, boy, yeah, going to be a lot of lifetimes. We're never done, as we all say. And so what we then look at with balsamic phase is anything that's unfinished, incomplete, anything that's unexpressed or experienced between those two planets. So they're unfinished business, they're in patterns and stages of development. Whatever needs to be cycled back around again to bring these two planets into culmination will do that in the balsamic phase. And this is true with the phase as well as balsamic conjunction. It can be a frustrating phase because we're starting to get the inklings of what's coming and we can want to move forward, but we're stuck finishing up something. Just like, I'm going to give you this ahead of time, just like the new phase is wanting to pull ahead, move forward, move forward, move forward, but we got the tug from the past because it's comfortable. In balsamic phase, it's like, oh gosh, I'm so done with this. Been there, done that. Can I move forward? And yet, there's something we've got to finish up. So the consciousness of our soul has to look at these two planets and culminate their blending together, and it has to culminate whatever it started at last quarter phase in regards to deeper understandings and broader awareness, all the way through from 270 to 360. Broader understandings. What are the universal principles with these two planets? How do we understand that? And we do that in consensus, individuated, and spirituated consciousness. And so, because it's a yin phase, the consciousness for these two planets can become very internalized, self-contemplative, goes inward, and it reflects on what is the nature of universal reality with these two planets, and how do I still have an individual expression of that understanding of the broadest concept between these two planets. And so balsamic phase, its polarity is gibbous phase. And while these are both yin phases, what happens is this balsamic phase, we can't just stay on the mountaintop or in the monastery. We have to take what we are aware of with these two planets on a universal basis, and we actually have to go out there and express it. And we have to express it in the world. So in many ways, it's how do we take those two planets relative to the polarity phase and be of service. Greater service to ourselves, to another, and to the universe as a whole. How do we put that universal awareness between these two planets into action? So then we move into the balsamic side of the semi-square, which is where we are beyond the 315 degrees. And so there is another evolutionary crises. There's always an evolutionary crises in the harmonics of eights. You know this through conjunctions, oppositions, first and last quarter squares. Now you're learning this through the semi-squares and the squares and a half, sesquisquadrate. Here, the evolutionary crisis is the accelerating of any two planets between what it constitutes for us on a personal level with its past and what it constitutes on a personal level with the future. And then we also are looking at those two planets with how, they are related culturally from the perspective of our past and how they are going into the future from the broadest levels that we can understand these two planets. And recognize that the future is always unknown, it's unconditioned, and we can have a resistance to that because we are having to leave behind what is known. And so there is a conflict with the desires. We have to fulfill our societal duties and obligations out there in the world. Venus, balsamic Mars, still has intimate relationships that they have to relate through. And this need to want to just withdraw and literally start to experiment with moving forward new ways with those new conjunctions. It's like balsamic phase semi-square. One foot's in the past and one foot's in the future with regard to the two planets. And the way forward is to have a rhythm between them of, back and forth in the world, not of the world, doing whatever I need to in the world with these two planets, and yet also having my ability to just go within. And as you see then, one more slide, sorry. So with that need to withdraw and internalize that consciousness, when we have that inner cycle, it gives us the time period for the new seeds that want to gestate and come forward. And so those are there, okay? But we can't quite go into them yet. We can be aware of it. It's almost like, well, in my next lifetime, I want to, create and work through this unfinished desire. What we've still got to do here, though, is recover that past. And if we're not making an effort, we can have the confusion, the disintegration. And so when any two planets is in balsamic phase, and specifically in this balsamic semi-square, they can't relate to people in the same way that those two planets would in opposition or would in the crescent semi-square. They've got to have that deeper expression of any two planets as they're relating to anyone. And so, again, a foot in the past, a foot in the future, fulfilling the past to free yourself up to move into the future. And then as we move past that, then you can see just 5 degrees beyond that, we run into the balsamic phase noville, that harmonics of 9. And remember, the key word for noville is gestation of some sort. And so when any two planets are in this aspect together, this is where we really, really have the new ideas, the new thoughts, the new awareness of moving forward start to really, really come into consciousness. But we're still balsamic phase. So while we are so highlighted with understanding it, we still have to finish things up. And so at this juncture, there's two reactions. We want to move forward. We've got the ideas of how these two planets are going to start a new cycle of growth together. But we can be frustrated because we also know that we've got to fulfill their final expressions together and fulfill however these two planets need to finish up expressing in the world on a broad universal level. And so if we try to jump forward too much, sometimes we'll get confused and we get thrown back into that past, and we have to work through it. We have to finish it up. We also, though, can get thrown back into that past because remember, future's unknown, past is known. Past represents security. These seed thoughts coming in can undermine existing reality. And so we're like, nope, not going to pay any attention to this. Nope. And we refuse to one foot in the past, one foot in the future, gracefully finishing up as we are aware, or even maybe putting a few steps forward into movement. And so it can be an individual choice here on how it is we're going to work with this aspect between any two planets. And so I specifically chose your chart, Chris, because I know you have enough experience with evolutionary astrology. So as I've explained this, you can give us example. I don't know if you guys remember this, but we used Chris in the new phase noville between Pluto and Saturn. Now we're going to use the balsamic between Pluto and Uranus. And so, Chris, just hearing this, and as we've been walking through this, if you're looking at your chart with Uranus and Pluto, and I'm going to tell everybody, here's the starting point with Pluto. And we're going to go all the way around the circle 320 degrees to get to Uranus. Chris, I'm just going to jump over to you and say, thoughts, my dear.
Well, as you know, Kim Marie, I am a balsamic personality. Everything defaults to that other balsamic relationship between the Sun and Venus, which is basically almost complete.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So I think that Pluto-Uranus novile balsamic relationship is significant because it provides me with the equipment to start to integrate everything, that chart is asking me to do, right? Yeah. So personally, I do feel that the bottom line is that Sun-Venus balsamic, because it is also the chart ruler, and it's in such specific relationship to Pluto. So that individuated consciousness that is being both completed and reborn, as signified by that Pluto-Uranus, is being supported by all of that karmic activity that went on before, and that is being brought in to do that work.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And that's for sure. That has been the pattern of the conscious life, right? A sense of both initiation and completion. With the emphasis, I think, for the first part of the life on the completion part, and then moving into that sense of, because there's a lot of new phase in my chart as well, and so that's already being seeded, and it's being born out of that balsamic energy that is so significant, right? And it's all about values. duh.
Balsamic phase.
Yeah, and you know, the strong second house and the Scorpio tendency to over, you know, over analyze and overthink and over dig, over deep dig, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, and then again, that significant Sun Venus relationship that I think really is sort of the megaphone in the chart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So,
it couldn't be any closer, right?
right, right. Yes, and so I'll point out, you know, for everybody, you know, we're looking at all those Scorpio planets that are pulled into various squares with Pluto, you know, and they're all going to be the crescent or first quarter square. Let me also just share for people, um, when we look at Uranus, because it's 84 years around the circle, and so it spends approximately 7 years in a sign. So Uranus creates these mini generations of souls that are really trying to individualize Uranus. And so that Uranus in Cancer mini generation that came through in the late 40s to early 50s, many of them were born with Pluto and Cancer parents. And relative to the whole, Chris, as I'm watching the board, you may want to mute yourself and just unmute as you speak, because I think the board's hearing a little bit of feedback in ways. And so, you know, that whole Pluto and Cancer generation that came in from I'm trying to think of what it was, the early 1900s to 1938, I think it was, you know, the traditional Betty Crocker Marlboro man stuff, you know, so patriarchal, conditioned to be in the traditional male and female roles. And yet, relative to the patriarchy, you know, there was a lot of distortions. There was no honoring of the emotions in the male, even though they were Pluto and Cancers. And so that mini generation in the late 40s to early 50s that was born with Uranus in Cancer, this tells us that these are souls that many times came into parents that could not fulfill their early nurturing, that could not fulfill their emotional needs. And it also signifies souls that had family of origin wounding, trauma, Uranus from past lives that also comes in and is re-imprinted, so to speak, with these Pluto and Cancer parents. And so Chris is part of that, you know, mini generation of needing to heal this. The intent for this Uranus in Cancer mini generation is to, again, learn to parent themselves. Well, you don't know how to do that when you're 5 years old. It's a process that you take as you become an adult, hopefully. And so they're having to learn how to nurture themselves, Cancer, mother themselves, and they're having to learn how to mature the Capricorn polarity of growing up and fathering themselves. And so that adds to this picture then as we look at Uranus in this 320 noville relationship to Pluto. And it will add to the picture, you know, especially relative to, you know, Chris being, I consider, first spirituated state, that spirituated consciousness, even though she's had all this, you know, Scorpio trauma and blah, 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 there has always been this broader searching or understanding of things from just outside the context of the immediacy of her family situation or the immediacy of the relationship and the children, or even, you know, through the work environment. That those two planets, that Uranus Pluto, has always been leading her to reflect on things from broader and broader perspectives, balsamic phase. And I would also say with that noville, and you can give me feedback on this next statement, Chris, I would say that relative to this being gestation, you know, your soul could be getting insights into how you are going to break free and individualize next time around, you know, next lifetime. It could even be sparking in you, well, what country would I like to be born in? What culture do I want to be born in? What desires, Pluto, are yet unfinished that are sparking that I want to come back and experience? That's relative to Uranus and Pluto. This can be what can gestate here to these planets on, you know, again, relative to your spirituated state of consciousness and relative to these two deep, big, broad planets. Does any of that spark for you, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. You're right on, as always. So yeah, so I think that just a few little thoughts on some of the things that you said about the Uranus and Cancer generation. I basically raised myself. My father was actually a Pluto and Gemini, right?
Mm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
But because of the specific circumstances, and this was a soul choice, right? So, I mean, that's why the soul dumped this consciousness into that environment, because um, I, I was doing their income tax before I was 12.
oh, all them
which
second house
which
planets.
is yeah, which is why I hate anything to do with money. Right? Like it just drives me crazy because I was doing it, you know, when I was a little kid. And I mean, I don't know what I was doing on their income tax at that age. Like, my God, what the heck were they thinking letting me do the income tax at that age? But I used to fill in all the slots, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is absolutely true. I had to be my own mother and my own father. And, you know, I think that that's interesting also with that sun moon conjunction in new phase, right? You know, some astrologers have said, oh, well, your parents were very significant in your formative years. Yes, by their non-presence.
Yeah, I was going to say by lack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so yeah, and for sure, Kim, that sense of, you know, that peculiar feature that balsamic personalities have of being able to travel the timeline,
Mm-hmm.
you know, going back and forth between, you know, with the now being the, you know, the anchor point. That happens a lot in my consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of my existence, I think it was more to do with the karmic unload.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm for sure, since the second Saturn return, it's to do with the options for next time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Thank you, honey. Few more slides. I'm going to try and get them in before our break, okay? And then we're going to come back in that last section and we're going to work with the nodal axis aspects to the natal chart, and then we'll work with a couple of forecastings. Okay, so wait a minute. I'm going to go this way. And the next aspect we come to is the 330-degree semi-sextile. And the closer and closer we get to 360, the more that this new evolutionary cycle between any two planets starts to become more clear, more aware, and how we actually just want to, you know, have an expression of these two planets that is natural in the timeless universal sense. These two planets go beyond consensus society. Remember that the semi-sextile is half of a sextile. So there's going to be choice points, just like there are with waxing and waning sextiles. And here it's, choosing to try and fit in with society, which we can't do any longer, or choosing to really honor these two planets according to how we naturally see them existing. And it can make us appear different to others. I just don't get it, with the two planets. And take for instance what we have going on right now in society is Jupiter is balsamic Saturn by degrees of conjunction, and they're not going to have that specific conjunction rebirthing a 20-year cycle until the winter solstice here. When is it? December 19th, I think, at 0.5 degrees Aquarius. No, December 21st, right on that winter solstice. So, when you have Jupiter in this balsamic phase to Saturn, for example, you're not going to fit into societal norms anymore. And in the United States, the societal norm of police brutality to people of color. Look at everybody standing up and saying collectively with this forecasting of Jupiter balsamic Saturn, this is not rule of law anymore. This doesn't fit with natural law anymore. So there's that example, but we can have it when we have these planets in that balsamic semi-sextile. We'll have it individually, where we look different to society. And it will behoove us to stay true to whatever our understanding and completion of these two planets are, and whatever our vision of these two planets are. And so here there's another gestation, but it's the culminating of this entire evolutionary cycle between these two planets. Now it's starting to dissolve. And sometimes these two planets will seem, we won't see the meaning to them. They just don't serve us anymore. We can't relate to these two planets in this phase anymore. And what we have to do is let go of the need to be secure with that, because when it is that emptiness and meaningless, it can be that been there, done that. And so the Neptune, Pisces, 12th house archetype and that balsamic phase, this is that dissolving of the past because it no longer serves us. And yet, because souls desire to be secure, we want to cling to it. And so it's an ability to let go and allow the new to come into our awareness, however possible, however necessary. And as that new comes in, it can bring relief and clarity for the soul relative to these two planets together. And so eventually then we go another 30 degrees and we end up at the balsamic phase conjunction, the harmonics of one. And here again, I will lose a wide orb. And I'm sure you're probably understanding now why evolutionary astrology in general uses wider orbs, because of this host cycle, 0 to 360. And everything is in a process of evolving and relating. And so I'll start in, I see a balsamic conjunction in a 10-degree orb, and I'll start to consider it that conjunction. And so the 350 degrees, 51, 52, this is where there is that condensing of this whole cycle, finishing up, coming to completion. This is where the transition of the egocentric consciousness between these two planets is really moving into the universal consciousness, but it's intensifying the closer and closer it gets. And so Here you see the words. It really is becoming been there, done that. How do I let go? And as we'll see in the next couple of slides, how do I fulfill any karmic obligations? The new evolutionary cycle between these two planets is starting to come in stronger, stronger, stronger. We feel that pull to move forward. And yet, at that balsamic conjunction, we must make peace and move through any remaining karmic duties and obligations with these two planets. The balsamic conjunction is one of the most frustrating aspects there is because it is such a huge transition. We want to move forward, but we've got to fulfill the karma. And so when two planets are in balsamic conjunctions together, you can see all kinds of karmic circumstances and people and situations that come through because we've got to close it out. We've got to finish it through. We've got to, make peace and deal with it as best as possible, or we'll continue to come in with those two planets in a balsamic conjunction together until we do. Right there where it says individuals will remain at this evolutionary junction until we complete whatever the lessons are between these two planets. They are also potential vehicles to bring through universal, timeless principles. I don't know if you remember in my chart, but I have Mercury at one in a almost. I have Mercury 359 degrees to Neptune. Mercury is a 1 degree balsamic conjunction to Neptune. Scorpio, 9th house. Here I am, evolutionary astrology, teaching it, bringing it through. Example. But we can also have situations where those planets in that balsamic conjunction can have a lot of all these Neptunian words: confusion, disassociation, alienation, delusionment, discontentment. And again, if it's coming through like that, when that's happening, it's because we have to learn lessons through that. Something that we have been clinging to as meaning between these two planets, it's not true. It's not universal. It's not true for us on a personal level, and it may not be true for us on a universal level. And so we will necessarily go through the disillusionment of those two planets until we can figure out what their ultimate meaning is as a planetary pair. The clues will be through the signs and houses that the balsamic conjunction manifests in, and to really make a harmony with those two planets on the deepest, broadest levels, and to express them in any unfinished way in which we have not done it. And so I have the last example here for you on Bill Gates. So we're going to go just a few more minutes, if you don't mind, and move through this before our break. We've looked at his chart before. He's currently, oh, I just recognized I got a tail. Feeny. Yeah. We've currently looked at this, and he is currently the second richest person in the world, one of the 3 richest people in the United States. And as you can see here, we look at this Venus balsamic conjunction in his chart, and it is literally a half a degree from the new phase conjunction. Now, in some of your more traditional astrology, Jupiter is always seen as one of the archetypes of money and resources. Just especially, it can be expansion of resources, but Jupiter can also bring the loss of resources. Well, you just look at this, and this person has this balsamic conjunction, one of the wealthiest people on planet Earth. Well, if you've read your slides, you will see, whoops, I got to go back to this so I can move back and forth easily with this. I had done some aspects for him, so I just kept that in there because what I wanted to point out is there was an expose done by the Nation magazine. If you don't know what that is, it is the oldest continually published magazine in the United States. It started being published just before the Civil War, and it is quite liberal and very much politically orientated. I've subscribed to it for a long, long time. They did an expose on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They've given $250 million in charitable grants to companies in which the Gates hold corporate stocks and bonds. So they get tax breaks for these charitable donations. But they keep getting richer, 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 richer. And so here was a slide from Forbes. The green arrow is the foundation, okay? And again, giving away buku dollars of money. And all that comes back into Bill through his stockholdership in all these corporations. And the Nation was bringing the ethical question, Jupiter, balsamic, Pluto. Is this, should this be legal? Should we be able to do something like this? And so I've also subscribed to Dr. McCullough for a while. My interest in health and wellness. And so he carried on from the Nation's article and pointed out, here are all of these corporations, and a lot of them are pharmaceutical corporations, okay? And, here's money that he's giving to those. And then it's this revolving door of really wanting to have, disease surveillance and national tracking system in which our vaccine records would be embedded in our bodies as, invisible ink tattoos. So you can't go to this state or you can't come into our country if you don't have one of these. And so there is some concerns and fears about the traditional medical drug culture of controlling us and pushing us into vaccines, when for some of us it may not be something that we choose to do on an ethical basis. And so I just point this out to you in regards to his chart, as when we look at this balsamic conjunction, what has he done in past lives that has created the situation where all of this wealth comes to him? And yet on a karmic, universal, timeless level, balsamic conjunction, what is he choosing to do in sharing that wealth? So for me, this really does put him in that third consensus consciousness, because he is so traditional in the vaccination world. I do not mean to say that he has not done good work when it comes to, for instance, the malaria drug and how devastating that can be over in Africa, and how it has improved the lives of so many people over there. That is something with this Jupiter balsamic Pluto in which it's, you see that happening in a beneficial way, in an ethical way. Jupiter Pluto is the evolution of the soul's beliefs on a conscious level. And yet, with all of this technological background that he has, is there a projection of his ethics being made that you will have to agree with this, you will have to share? I mean, these are very, very broad principles and subjects that are, specifically playing out for us collectively, not just in the United States, but on a broad level with all the donations that he makes to the World Health Organization, and how, yes, Bill, they listen to him. This aspect is playing out for him personally on the world stage. And look at how it can have such an effect on all of us, in some ways good, in some ways, I don't know, maybe not so good. And especially as we look at Jupiter and Saturn having their conjunction, and, early Aquarius, and then Jupiter in Aquarius for 2021, Saturn in Aquarius 21, 22, and then Pluto going into Aquarius for 20 years, 23, 24. We got a lot of Aquarian energy coming in, bringing in this Aquarian age. And do we, as nations, do we as a human species agree that we should all have a chip in us? And should that chip literally give a barometer of what the patriarchal authority structures say we need to take? Hey, there's a balsamic conjunction example for you. All right, let's all look at our clocks. We're going to take another one of those 10-minute breaks, and then we're going to come back and do our last section of material. And I'll also, of course, answer any questions as we go through the last section. I'll see you back in 10 minutes.